His words stumbled, but his heart raced for something more. Eli, a 16-year-old with a mop of dark hair and eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze, lived in a crumbling village where fields stretched wide but dreams stayed small. Orphaned at 10, he'd been raised by his gruff uncle in a place where whispers followed him. Not for his loss, but for his stutter, a tangle of sounds that made every sentence a battle. Kids at school mocked him, their laughter sharp, and adults offered pitying smiles, assuming he'd never amount to much. Eli felt like a ghost, drifting through a village that didn't know how to hear him, his thoughts locked behind a voice that betrayed him. The village wasn't much kinder to itself. Its heart was a failing farm, once a hub of harvests and horse races, now overgrown with weeds, its barns sagging under neglect. Eli passed it daily, drawn to the quiet of its fields, where he could breathe without fear of being heard. One spring dusk, as the sun bled orange across the horizon, he heard a faint snort, rough and labored from behind a broken fence. Curiosity pulled him closer through brambles that snagged his clothes until he found it. A horse, gaunt and scarred, its coat dulled by dust, tethered to a rotting post. Its eyes, wide and wary, locked onto Eli's, and for once he didn't feel judged. The horse's ribs showed through its hide, its mane tangled with burrs. But it stood, defiant, as if it still had somewhere to run. Eli didn't know horses. His uncle called them a waste of feed, but he couldn't walk away. He slipped through the fence, hands shaking, and offered a handful of grass, his voice soft, stuttering less in the silence. The horse snorted, then took the grass, its breath warm against his palm. Eli named it Dusty, for the coat that hid its strength, and something stirred in him. A spark, a need to help something as broken as he felt. He wasn't bold, wasn't skilled. His stutter made even asking for help a gamble. The village would laugh, call him a fool for thinking he could save a horse when he couldn't save his own voice. But Dusty's steady gaze, unyielding despite its scars, held him there, whispering that maybe they could carry each other. Eli didn't know it yet, but that horse, found in a field of forgotten dreams, would pull him from the shadows. Dusty, scarred and stubborn, would carry him toward a purpose he'd never dared to claim, showing a village that even the silenced could run. If Eli and Dusty's spark of hope resonates with you, if you've ever felt unheard but kept going, hit the like button now. It's a nod to everyone chasing a dream against the odds. Subscribe to join our community of believers, where stories like this remind us we're never alone. Share with someone who needs a push to run. Comment, what's helped you find your voice? Let's rise together. Eli's days had a new rhythm, one that didn't choke on words. At 16, he'd learned to move through his village like a shadow, his stutter a chain that kept him quiet, unseen. The other kids' taunts, the adults' pitying glances, they'd carved a hollow space in him, a place where dreams didn't grow. But Dusty, the scarred horse he'd found tethered in the ruins of the old farm, was changing that. Each dawn, before the village woke, Eli slipped through the fields, his pockets stuffed with apples swiped from his uncle's pantry, to find Dusty waiting, his ears twitching at the sound of Eli's steps. The horse was still gaunt, his coat rough with neglect, but his eyes held a fire that made Eli feel less alone. Eli knew nothing about horses. His uncle, a man of few words and fewer hopes, called the farm a lost cause, its fields too dry to save, its races a faded memory. "Stay away from that nag," he'd grumble. But Eli couldn't. Dusty needed him, and that need was a lifeline. He'd spend hours by the broken fence, brushing burrs from Dusty's mane with his fingers, his voice low, stuttering less when it was just them. He'd talk about school, about the kids who mimicked him, about the father he barely remembered. Dusty would snort, nudging Eli's hand for more apples, his warmth a reply that didn't judge. Eli started bringing water from the creek, hauling buckets until his arms ached, watching Dusty drink with a hunger that mirrored his own. The village wasn't blind to Eli's visits. Old man Torres, whose land bordered the farm, spotted him one morning and laughed, his voice carrying over the fields. A stuttering boy and a half-dead horse. Good luck, kid. The words stung, pulling Eli back to every time he'd frozen in class, his mouth betraying him. He'd failed to speak up, failed to be the son his father might have wanted. What made him think he could help Dusty? The horse's scars, jagged lines across his flank, told a story of pain Eli couldn't erase. What if he made things worse, proved Torres right? His uncle's warnings echoed. The farm was cursed, and so was anyone who tried to save it. But Dusty didn't care about curses. One evening, Eli found an old brush in the barn, its bristles worn but usable. He worked slowly, smoothing Dusty's coat, feeling the horse's muscles tense, then relax. Dusty's head lowered, his breath steady, and Eli felt a spark, a trust, fragile but real. He began to notice more, the way Dusty's ears flicked at birds, the way his hooves shifted when Eli hummed an old tune his mother used to sing. He'd mimic those sounds, whistling softly, and Dusty would turn, his eyes bright, as if answering. It wasn't much, but it was something. A bridge between them built in the quiet of a failing farm. Eli started small, clearing weeds around Dusty's tether, using a rusty shovel he'd found. His hands blistered, but the work felt good, like he was carving out a space for them both. He'd sneak grain from the market, hiding it under his shirt, learning Dusty's hunger by the way he ate. Slow at first, then eager. The horse's ribs were less sharp now, his coat less dull, and Eli felt it too. A purpose. Reason to show up. The village kept talking. Torres called him a dreamer, kids snickered as he passed. But Dusty's steady presence dulled their noise. Eli wasn't strong, wasn't sure. His stutter still tripped him up, his doubts louder than his voice. But each time Dusty nudged his shoulder, each time the horse stood taller, Eli held on to a thought. Maybe broken things could run again. He wasn't ready to dream big, not yet. The farm's barns loomed, their roofs caving, a reminder of how far he'd have to go. But in that field, with Dusty's breath warm against his hand, Eli wasn't just the stuttering kid. He was someone a horse trusted, someone who could try. The village didn't see it, not yet, but Eli felt it. A seed of something new, growing where silence used to be. What's pushed you to keep trying even when others laughed? Drop a comment below and share your spark. Let's grow these dreams together. Eli's world was no longer just silence and stumbles. At 16, he'd spent years dodging. His village's stairs, his stutter a wall that kept him small. But Dusty, the scarred horse he'd found in the ruins of the old farm, was rewriting that story. The fields where Eli once hid were now a proving ground, where Dusty's strengthening strides matched the beat of Eli's heart. Each morning he'd trek to the farm before dawn, his backpack heavy with stolen grain, and a battered book on horses he'd found in the school library. Dusty's coat was shinier now, his ribs less stark, and Eli could feel the horse's trust in the way he'd nuzzle his shoulder, seeking the apples Eli always brought. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a bond forged in the quiet of a village that didn't see them. Eli was learning Dusty's language. He'd whistle short, sharp notes, mimicking the birds that made Dusty's ears flick and the horse would turn, his eyes bright as if answering. Eli noticed how Dusty moved, stiff at first, then fluid, his hooves kicking up dust like he remembered running. The book talked about training horses, about trust and patience, and Eli tried, guiding Dusty in slow circles with a frayed rope, his voice soft, stuttering less when no one else was there. He'd hum his mother's old lullaby, and Dusty's head would lower, his breath calm. It felt like a secret, like they were building something the village couldn't touch. Eli started dreaming, not just of saving Dusty, but of running with him, maybe in the races the farm used to host, a flicker of a life where he wasn't the kid, who couldn't speak. His uncle wasn't impressed. "You're wasting time," he'd snap, his voice rough as the dry fields. "That farm's dead and so's that horse." The words hit hard, dragging Eli back to every time he'd choked on a sentence, every time he'd let his father's memory down. The village echoed the doubt. Old man Torres spread word that Eli was chasing a fool's dream. and kids at school left notes on his desk scrawled with "Stutter's horse gonna fall." Eli's cheeks burned, his silence a flex. He'd failed to fit in, failed to be more than a shadow. What if they were right? Dusty's scars were fading, but he was still weak, his legs untested. What if Eli pushed too hard, hurt the one thing that believed in him? But Dusty didn't waver. One evening, Eli led him to a wider field, the sun sinking in a blaze of orange. He'd found an old halter in the barn, its leather cracked but strong, and slipped it on, guiding Dusty with gentle tugs. The horse stepped faster, his hooves steady, and Eli ran beside him, breathless, his stutter forgotten in the wind. Dusty tossed his head, a spark of the racer he might have been, and Eli laughed, a sound so rare it startled him. He began to push further, clearing a path through the weeds, marking a rough track with stones. He'd read about the village races, how horses once flew, how crowds cheered. Could Dusty run like that? Could he? Eli dug deeper, sneaking into the library to study horse care, memorizing feeds and exercises. He'd mix oats with market scraps, watching Dusty eat with a hunger that grew fiercer. The horse's muscles filled out, his strides longer, and Eli felt it too, a strength, a reason to stand taller. He wasn't ready, wasn't loud, his voice still caught, his doubts still roared. But Dusty's snorts, the way his hooves hit the earth, were a rhythm Eli could follow. The farm's barns loomed, their decay a challenge, but Eli wasn't just hiding anymore. He was someone Dusty ran for, someone who could dream. The village kept talking. Torres called it madness, kids snickered louder. But Eli held on to Dusty's warmth, the way he'd stand close, scars and all. He wasn't bold, wasn't sure, but he was here, running, with a horse who saw him when no one else did. The races were a whisper, a maybe, but each step Dusty took, each note Eli whistled, made it louder. The fields weren't empty anymore. They held a boy and a horse, chasing something worth hearing. What dream have you chased, even when the world said no? Share it in the comments below, and let's keep running together. Eli's heart beat louder than his fears ever had. At 16, he'd spent years letting his stutter cage him, his voice a knot of shame in a village that mocked what it didn't understand. But Dusty, the scarred horse he'd nursed back to strength, had cracked that cage open. The old farm's fields, once choked with weeds, were now a track where Eli ran beside Dusty, the horse's hooves pounding a rhythm that drowned out the village's doubts. Eli's dreams had grown. Dusty wasn't just a horse. He was a racer, and the village's long-dead races, a faded legend of cheering crowds, felt close enough to touch. But dreams were fragile, and the village wasn't ready to believe in a stuttering boy or a broken horse. Not until the night everything shifted. Dusty was stronger now, his scars fading under a coat that gleamed in the dusk. Eli had trained him with care, using whistles and gentle pulls on the old halter, guiding him around the stone-marked track. One summer evening, with the sky burning red, Eli felt Dusty pull harder, his strides long and sure. He let the rope slacken, running beside him, and Dusty surged, his hooves a blur, kicking up clouds of dust that caught the light. Eli's breath hitched, his legs burning, but he laughed, wild and free, as Dusty ran like the racers in the stories. His uncle's neighbor, Clara, a quiet widow who'd watched from her porch, clapped, her eyes wide. "He's got heart," she called, and Eli, for once, didn't stutter when he nodded back. Clara's words spread, but so did old man Torres's scorn. He'd seen Eli and Dusty, and his voice carried at the market. "That boy's gonna break his neck, and that nag's no racer." The kids at school echoed him, leaving notes that stung. "Stutter's horse gonna crash." Eli's uncle was harsher, his face hard as he grabbed Eli's arm. "Stop this nonsense. You'll ruin what's left of that farm." The words clawed at Eli, pulling him back to every time he'd frozen, every time he'd let his father's memory slip. What if Torres was right? Dusty was stronger but untested in a real race. What if Eli pushed too far, hurt the horse who'd trusted him? His stutter choked him again, his voice lost in the fear that he'd fail Dusty, fail himself. But Dusty's fire didn't dim. One evening, Clara brought her grandson Mateo to the farm, a shy kid who loved horses. Mateo watched Dusty run, his face lit with awe, and begged to help. Eli hesitated. His stutter made explaining hard, but Dusty snorted, nudging Mateo's hand, and Eli found words, halting but clear. They ran together, Eli whistling, Dusty charging, and Mateo whooped, filming it on his phone. Without Eli knowing, Mateo posted the clip online, captioned, "Eli and Dusty bringing the races back." By morning, the video had spread. Villagers shared it, a local shop owner reposted it, and a regional racing club reached out, offering to revive the village races if Dusty could run. They needed a spark, they said. And Eli's horse was it. Eli froze. A race? With crowds watching, judging his every stumble? He'd spent years hiding, his stutter a reason to stay small. Speaking to strangers, leading a race, it felt like standing naked in the market square. Torres's laugh echoed. What if Dusty fell? What if Eli's voice failed, proved he was nothing? Clara saw his fear, her voice soft but firm. You gave that horse a chance, Eli. Let him give you one. His uncle stayed silent, his frown softer, but the doubt in Eli's chest roared. He wasn't a racer, wasn't his father. What if he let Dusty down, let the village's dreams collapse again? Yet Dusty's snorts, steady and fierce, grounded him. That night, Eli led him to the track, the fields quiet under a star-strewn sky. He whistled and Dusty ran, his hooves a drumbeat, his scars glowing in the moonlight. The race wasn't just a test, it was a chance to show the village himself that silence didn't define him. Eli wasn't ready, wasn't loud, but Dusty's strength, his trust through pain lit a fire. He nodded, gripping the halter, whispering to Dusty about the races they'd run, together, for a crowd he might finally face. Eli stood in the field, the dawn air sharp with the scent of earth and hope. At 16, he'd spent years believing his stutter made him invisible, his dreams too heavy for a village that laughed at his tangled words. But Dusty, the scarred horse he'd pulled from the ruins of a forgotten farm, had carried him further than he'd ever imagined. The video of Dusty's run had spread, igniting whispers of the old races, and now the village buzzed with plans for a revival, a race to save the farm, with Eli and Dusty at its heart. Fear still gnawed at him. Crowds, eyes, the chance his voice would fail. But Dusty's steady snorts, his hooves firm on the track, had shown him he could run. The race was here, and Eli wasn't hiding anymore. The village had transformed overnight. Fields once choked with weeds were cleared. The old track, lined with hay bales and banners sewn by neighbors. Stalls rose selling pies and crafts, their colors bright against the barn's peeling paint. The racing club had come, bringing timers and a makeshift grandstand, but it was the village that shone, kids waving flags, Clara beaming from her porch, even old man Torres watching, his scowl softer. Eli's uncle stood by the fence, his arms crossed, but his eyes on Dusty, a nod replacing his usual grumble. Eli's hands shook as he adjusted Dusty's halter. The horse's coat gleaming under the morning sun, his scars a map of their shared fight. What if he froze, let Dusty stumble, prove the village wrong? The race wasn't just a run. It was a reckoning. As the crowd gathered, Eli led Dusty to the starting line, his heart pounding louder than the cheers. Mateo, Clara's grandson, ran up, slipping a braided ribbon into Dusty's mane, his grin wide. You got this, Eli, he said, and Eli swallowed, his voice halting, but there. The thanks. The other horses, sleek and trained, pawed the ground, their riders glancing at Eli with smirks. Torres's voice cut through. That nag won't last. Eli's doubts roared, his stutter, his inexperience, the weight of a village's hope. He wasn't a racer, wasn't his father. What if Dusty fell? What if he failed them all? But Dusty's warmth steadied him. The whistle blew, and Dusty surged, his hooves a drumbeat, his scars glowing in the light. Eli clung to the reins, his body low, his voice a whisper. Only Dusty heard to run, boy. The track blurred, The crowd a roar, and Dusty flew. Not sleek but fierce, his strides eating the earth. Eli's stutter didn't matter here. His fears didn't hold. The wind carried them away. They weren't first. 2 horses passed. But Dusty ran third, his head high, and the crowd roared louder than for the winner. Clara wept. Mateo whooped, filming it all, and Eli laughed, tears streaking his face as Dusty slowed, his breath heavy but proud. The race wasn't the end. It was a spark. The village raised funds, enough to rebuild the farm's barns. Its fields planted anew. Kids painted a mural on the stable, Dusty's silhouette galloping under a golden sky, their brushes bright with laughter. Eli joined the racing club, training others, his voice halting but clear, teaching kids like Mateo to whistle for horses. Dusty didn't race again, but he roamed the fields, his scars a story kids touched in awe. The village changed. Torres brought feed, gruff but kind, and neighbors shared stories of their own silenced dreams. Eli's uncle clapped his shoulder, his voice soft. Your dad would have run too. Eli wasn't whole, wasn't fearless. His stutter lingered, and doubt still crept in. Had he done enough? Would he ever be the son his father saw? But Dusty's trust, his run through scars, had shown him he could carry loss and still soar. He'd lead training now, his whistle sharp, kids echoing it, their cheers a new kind of home. The farm thrived, its story spreading online, drawing visitors who left notes. You showed me how to run. Eli kept one tucked beside his father's old hat, proof he was here, leading. One dusk, Eli stood by the track, Dusty grazing close, the village alive with market lights. He whistled his mother's lullaby and Dusty snorted, his head high. The fields weren't silent anymore. They held a boy and a horse, running for dreams that echoed. Eli smiled, knowing he belonged, not to shame, but to the strength he'd found within it. Eli and Dusty's run proves even the silenced can soar. If their race to save a village stirred you, hit the like button now. It's a cheer for everyone chasing dreams, just like Eli did. Subscribe to join our community of believers, where stories like this spark connection. Share with someone needing to run. What's carried you through your doubts? Share in the comments, and let's soar together.